Sanbanan Dumalang, hello, it is Simply Sviso, and welcome back to my podcast, or welcome if it's your very first time. It's been a minute since I put out an episode, like probably about 10 months, if I'm not mistaken, so almost a year. And if I was doing this under different circumstances, I'd probably be a lot happier, like I'd probably be celebrating this episode, but I'm sure you can tell by the title, and you probably may or may not have read the show notes. You can tell that this is going to be quite a somber topic we're dealing with, and so I don't really know how best to like introduce it. So I think I'll just dive right into it. So before we get into it, I do want to give a content slash trigger warning, as this episode is going to have mentions of suicide and death. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. So by the time this episode is out, if you are into K-pop, you are probably aware of the passing of the Astro member Moonbin. And I do want to just give you guys some context and just to tell you guys like why I'm making this episode. And so, firstly, I do want to honor his memory. This is also my way of trying to process my own feelings and my grief, and hopefully this can help others. Even if you're not necessarily someone who was a fan of Moonbin, you're not necessarily mourning him specifically, but I think anyone who's dealt with grief of a loved one, any form of grief actually, I think this episode might potentially be helpful for them. Now, as I did mention that it's been almost a year since I put out a podcast episode, and I'm sure the question that some people might have is, okay, then why did you come back now? Why is this the first episode I'm making in over a year? And the truth is, like, at this point today, it's been 6 days since Moonbin's passing. I did actually want to speak about him, and speak out my thoughts on not thoughts on his death. That's not coming out well. But I did want to share, some of the reflections. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The reflections that came up while I was processing this news, and I contemplated like what would be the best avenue for that, right? Like, should I make a tweet? Should I make a TikTok or YouTube video? Now I did use I did use my Twitter circle to process some of my feelings and to share some reflections, which I'm actually going to share with you guys. And I did consider making either a TikTok or YouTube video, but then I decided against it simply because, I feel like when we post on these apps, number one, you have no control over who will end up seeing it. I mean, yes, like you can limit in terms of, like with TikTok, you can make your video private. Obviously, you can disable comments and stuff, even on YouTube. But I feel like the podcast has always been like a safe space for me to just come on and be vulnerable and not have to worry about censoring myself, which is another issue with these social media sites. You have to censor yourself. And so I feel like on the podcast I could just come, be messy, don't have to be as put together. And I trust that the people who would actually click on this episode and listen are people coming in with good faith. With social media, sometimes you have no control over, like, the people, as I mentioned, no control over who sees it. So some people can engage with your content and they're not doing it out of good faith. Like, they can be doing it out of Lord knows what intentions. So I think that is some of the background, right? So where do we go from here? I did write, a bit of a rough guide of how I want to structure the episode. So I think, okay, let me pull up my journal and share with you guys some of the journal entries I wrote last week when I first heard the news. Y'all. So, because I had not prepared accordingly, right? I paused the recording so I could fetch my journals and read it to you guys. And I realized after probably, I guess, like I read the journal entry, 10 minutes of rambling, I realized, oh, my laptop is not be recording anything. So that is great. Let me read to you guys my journal again. You guys didn't even hear me the first time. So basically what I was saying. So The first journal entry I'm going to read to you guys is from the 19th of April at about 11:30 p.m. This was a couple of hours after the news broke about Moonbin's passing. So I wrote here, it's been a couple of hours since I found out that Moonbin passed away. His death rocked me to my core. I fell apart. I couldn't keep myself together. God bless him and his family. My heart breaks, especially for his sister. I'm also considering my own mental health and thinking about the times when I contemplated taking my own life. I'm scared. And then I cannot for the life of me make out what I wrote after I'm scared. I wrote I really cannot make it out because I was in such an emotional state. Like, even if you could see my handwriting here, it's a mess. But then my final thought I wrote here was, I thought I would have more to say, but words are failing me right now. R.I.P. Moonbin. And so just to sort of take you guys back to, that day, because I do want to talk about it. So it was the day before it was the day before my final exam for family medicine. And it was about, for me in South Africa, it was around 6 p.m. I assume, yeah, because I was having supper. Like, the plan I was going to eat, I was watching a series, I was going to go back to studying for my exam. So while I'm eating, I'm on Twitter, and then I see the first tweet. And I can't remember the exact headline, but it was saying, Astro's Moonbin suddenly passed away. Sorry, excuse me. Suddenly passed away. And I remember just being like, is this some sick joke? But at that time, like, the verification was still there. So I saw it was a verified account from one of the well-known K-pop news outlets. So I just put down my phone and was like, okay, let me just finish my food. I don't know what's going on. So I finished my food, and because even the show I was watching was like 5 minutes. I was like, let me just finish this episode, and then I'll go back and see what is going on, because wow. So I pick up my phone again, and then because now that obviously I just saw the tweet, so I'm like, okay, let me click on the link, because the link attached to it, right? So I click on the link and I read the article, and that's where the first line I remember see content warning, possible suicide, and my heart just dropped. And I read the article, and I remember just being stunned, absolutely stunned, not knowing what to do, how to act, not knowing should I text my friends, who are into K-pop, and also, one of my closest friends, I know, like, she really loves Moonbin, and her sister loves Moonbin. I was like, should I text her to? But I remember even I actually started typing a message to her, but then I just completely I don't know what happened, right? Because I also remember around that time, as I mentioned, right, it was the day for my exam. Some of my friends planned a last minute study group, and they didn't tell me in time. So the one friend was apologizing, saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we didn't tell you in time." And I'm just thinking to myself, to be honest, right now I couldn't care less about that study group. It's okay. I even at first I didn't initially tell her what was wrong. I just know it's fine. And I remember just going back on Twitter and just going back to that original tweet, and I remember just reading that article again and again and again. I don't know what I expected. I just could not believe it. And reading people's comments and seeing that, oh my gosh, it was the more I was seeing people react to it and be like, what is going on? This isn't real. That's the more real it was becoming. And so eventually I told my friend, the one who was supposed to have study group, was actually, I'm not okay right now, because I just found out that one of my favorite K-pop idols has passed on. And she was very compassionate, saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I know how much, these idols mean to you. What happened? Tell me more." And then, I tell her, about the article and them saying it's possibly suicide. And then I remember posting my WhatsApp status, and I think most people probably just ignored it. I did have also another friend be like, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" And I think that for me was very validating, because even one of my friends asked, "What can I do for me?" You just validating my feelings means a lot to me, because I was initially starting to gaslight myself into thinking that I'm crazy, why am I so emotionally bent out of shape by this? But it really rocked me to my core, and I really I could not study the rest of the evening. I was just I had a moment where like I stopped crying. I was like, okay, let me study for like 30 minutes. But then like I couldn't push beyond that. Like I could not concentrate, and I just found myself just like crying literally all night. I basically cried myself to sleep. And like the next morning, I went to my exam, and even after the exam, a friend of mine, like the same friend who I was texting the previous day, she was like, "I saw it in the morning, like your eyes were so swollen, you're not okay, but you look a little bit better." And I will say, like the exam, oh by the way, the exam beat my ass, beat my ass, worst exam. I can't think of an exam that was worse than that. Horrible, absolutely horrible. But I did say that I think having to write the exam was kind of good for me in the sense that it forced me to get out of my room. Otherwise, I would have stayed in my room the whole day. I would have stayed in bed the whole day, right? So I got to the exam that I got, and after the exam, that's when I started. Okay, let me process my feelings, and that's when I wrote something in my notepad. Let me just pull it up real quickly. So, now it's after my exam, and that's when so I mean after that, it was like Thursday, right? So after my exam, like that was basically the start of my recess. So I didn't have any more classes. I didn't have any exams, nothing for like next couple of days. So I was like, okay, now let me sit down and process my feelings. And so I wrote, there's this rant I kind of wrote, a ramble, I don't know what to call it, like venting a little bit, and also an open letter to Moonbin. So I'm gonna share both of these with you guys. Those who follow me on my Stan Twitter account have seen these, especially those who are in my Twitter circle, because I posted on my Twitter circle. But basically, I wrote, I discovered Moonbin about 7 months ago during one of the toughest times of my life. I often joke about how my mental health is in the pits when I fixate on K-pop idols, but this was truly the case. I was not doing okay, and Moonbin was one of the only sources of joy in my life during that time. Last year, I truly was struggling to see the point of living, and I was thinking about finding a way out. And it didn't help that there were some horrible, rude, and mean doctors that I had to interact with. I can't say Moonbin is the sole reason I'm still alive, but he played a great role alongside my friends who would check on me and validate my feelings. Moonbin had such a bright smile, and I can't help but think about how those with the brightest smiles might be suffering the most. Let me take a sip of water, you guys, because I'm getting emotional. So I do just want to give sorry, a bit of context, to this journal entry. So for those who don't know, I am a medical student, right? And so around this time, right, as I mentioned, that there were some horrible, really mean doctors that I interact with. I'm talking about because now I'm in my clinical years. Last year I was doing my fifth year, so we go to the hospital, and we have the clinical work we have to do and tutorials and stuff. So some of the doctors are just not very nice people to interact with, right? And I can feel myself getting really emotional about that. So I don't think I wanna go too deeply into that. But like I was like, it was just especially around the time when I discovered Moonbeam. It was around September last year. Things were not looking good for me, and then I feel like also I didn't realize just how bad my mental health was until after like my final exams, and then I went home for recess, like the December holidays. That's when I saw, oh, I was actually not okay. Once I was actually like away from that environment of med school, that's when I realized that, oh, the person that I was literally a shell of who I was, and even those dark thoughts, like they became less and less and less and less and less. And so I think, this is probably like part of the reason why I think Moonbin's death really impacted me so much, because of just how much he means to me. And I didn't realize how much he meant to me until we lost him. And that's what I talk about in the letter I wrote to him, which I am going to read to you guys. So it goes, Moonbin, I discovered you about 7 months ago via a YouTube short, and the first thing that captivated me was your smile. This was during one of the darkest times of my life, and you were the light that made life bearable. It hurts that you're gone, and I didn't realize how you truly meant to me until now. Your latest comeback with Sana is honestly one of my favorite releases of this year. Choop Choop is such a good song that always puts a smile on my face, and I love rewatching all the stages and fan cams. Even though you never knew me, I thank God that I got to know you. I'm praying for your family and everyone who loved you and is dealing with this loss. Rest in peace. You might be gone, but you'll never be forgotten, and you'll live on in our hearts and through the work you've released. So, how am I currently feeling? It's been a couple days. Um, I think definitely right now I'm definitely in a better space than I was last week, but clearly it's still very difficult for me to talk about him. I'm still, even right now, like I'm holding back emotions, like I'm tearing up, like I can feel like a lump in my throat. And I feel like this is the thing with there's this picture where it's showing grief as like a ball, and they say like your grief never gets smaller, you just grow around your grief, because as like, it's like then the as the picture progresses, I think it's like you see bigger and bigger jars, and I think this is definitely something that I'll just have to grow around. And to be honest, I think part of this, part of my, I guess, one of my thoughts through this process is, I think when someone does pass on, it does make us also question our own mortality, question the meaning of life. Like, what does it mean? Like, are we born just to die? Or are our lives meaningless? Like, all these questions are things I've been asking myself, and I mean, there are no answers, but a lot of questions. And I think especially when someone, in cases where, someone might have potentially taken their own life, it it hurts, for those of us who are left behind. You think that this person was going through so much pain and we didn't know, Like I mentioned, I wrote in one of my journal entries that sometimes the people with the brightest smiles are the ones who might be going through the absolute most. Like with Moonbin, he seemed like such a happy and carefree person, And what I don't really like is I've seen some fans like they're going back and pulling up clips and saying, oh, it's like they're looking for signs. And I understand, that it's like it's the grief, right? It's trying to make meaning, right? It's trying to, because we need to know, like, I think as humans want to know, like, why did this have to happen? But just for me personally, I don't think that's quite helpful. And I think also when it comes to with celebrities and public figures, like we don't actually know them, right? We only know what they portray to us. I'm actually reminded now of in the past 2 days, we've been seeing letters from some of Moonbin's close friends, and even the Astro members and his sister, and because obviously at this point, right, it was still like they said it was like a possible suicide, right? Like police were still investigating. But just from the letters that we've been seeing, it does sort of say they are sort of confirming that Moonbin was having a hard time, and I can only imagine, how hard it must be for them. Like if I'm feeling this much pain, I can't even imagine actually how bad it must be for them. And so my heart really does go out to them. And I wrote here in my show notes, some advice for dealing with grief. I'm just gonna read the points that I wrote. I don't know if they'll be helpful. I hope they will be. But basically, I just wrote, first and foremost, it's important to recognize and validate your feelings. Talk to someone as well who will also be able to, validate your feelings. I think also with grief, no matter how much time has passed, right? Even if 2 years from now you find yourself still feeling sad, or maybe, because I know also what happens when someone passes on, sometimes it can be a trigger for previous losses, previous people that we lost. You don't want someone's gonna tell you to just get over it, because like, how do you just get over, the loss of a loved one? How do you get over someone's life ending? Set boundaries and create space if you need. I know there are some people who, they decide they're going to take a break from social media. I also, in a way, like, did sort of set a little bit of boundary. Like, I wasn't as active. I did also, like, even in terms of posting, right? I limited most of my posts to my Twitter circle because I didn't want to um I didn't want to also, like, in the moment of grief, maybe say the wrong thing and trigger someone else or upset someone else. But also I didn't want to have to deal with potentially seeing triggering things myself. That's also I did, like, TikTok. I was not going on TikTok, especially just limiting my interactions with people who I know are a safe space. And also try to think about the good times, when you mourning someone, like in terms of Moonbin, he should be defined by more than just his death, right? His life and what he meant to us and what he means to us, should count more. And that's why, I was even recounting in my letter, about how I got into him and how his smile was so infectious and how entertaining he is and how I love his music, right? I found, I even found myself actually going through some of my old tweets I made about and actually laughing, and you shouldn't feel guilty if you have those emotions. And the last thing is, it's okay to keep living. I've seen some fans, and I've also experienced this also with previous losses in my life. And sometimes you feel guilty when you find yourself having moments where you don't think about the person who passed on. But that's okay and that's normal. And I think the last thing is that, grief. I was reading an article about grief, and I talk about how grief isn't a linear process, it's more of like a cycle. And I can definitely attest to that because through the days, I'll find moments where I feel happy, and it's almost like everything's gonna be okay. And sometimes I find myself falling back into a sort of depression. I find myself falling back into feelings of denial. I find myself, moments where, like, I've accepted it. It's a cycle, and this is one of those episodes where I can't have everything wrapped up nicely in a bow. I also feel like I didn't articulate myself as best as I would have liked to, but I do want this episode to be as honest as possible, so I don't want to, over edit myself. And I do hope I made sense. I hope I did not offend or trigger anyone. But on that note, I do want to close this episode with a prayer that I wrote. Now, if you know me, or if you've been a long time listener of the podcast, you know that I've got an interesting, tumultuous relationship with religion. But I will say, throughout this time, I did find comfort in praying. I did find comfort in listening to gospel and Christian music. And so this isn't me, like, imposing any belief system onto anyone. But yeah, so I want to close with this prayer that I wrote. It's a prayer that I wrote last week, the day when the news broke. So, I pray for Moonbin and his family. I pray for everyone suffering in silence and feeling alone. I pray for those left behind after losing loved ones. May they find peace. I pray for mental health. I pray against all systems that oppress and cause harm. Oh God, have mercy. In Jesus' name, for the greatest good, I pray. Amen. On that note, thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to reach out to me if you need someone to talk to. You can catch me on Twitter at Simply Sfiso. I'll write it down in the show notes. If we are mutuals on my other account, you can reach out to me there. If you have my number, feel free to text me. But also if you need to talk to a professional, they can Google hotlines. I'll try to, if I can find some, I'll put them in the show notes. Resources that you can reach out to, you need to talk to a professional. And yeah, on that note, thanks for listening, and until next time, bye guys.